Okay, but maybe I need it. I just put it in.
Ladies and gentlemen, friends and fellow travelers, thank you so much, Okwi, for your introduction. And I would like to urge you all not to miss the amazing, amazing exhibitions Okwi has at the moment, and as he always has here at the Haus der Kunst, just next door. So whenever you have a break, it's extremely urgent not to miss the exhibitions today or tomorrow. Most recently opened the Stan Douglas exhibitions, but there are many more exhibitions. So I would say it's an urgent visit of exhibitions for all of you. I'd like to also ask you all for a very special happy birthday again to Steffi. Steffi, happy birthday. Now, Steffi's birthday was on the 7th of July, and the birthday present to Steffi was that for the next 365 days, we're going to celebrate every day her birthday. Happy birthday, Steffi! And it is so exciting to be here at DLD, and as always, in this long, ongoing conversation, to introduce artists who work with the digital, sometimes through thematic panels, like Ways Beyond the Internet, as we did it at DLD in winter a year and a half ago, or 89+. The whole 89+ project started at DLD, but then also through individual artist presentations, as we did, for example, Ryan Trecartin in January. So we're extremely excited and happy to have Katja Novitskova here today with us. Katja has done a series of amazing exhibitions which oscillate, one can say, between the digital and the analog. And one of the many topics she works with patterns, she works with cosmic expansions, she works with approximation, but one of the particularly urgent topics we're going to discuss today is the topic of extinction. Please give a very, very warm welcome to Katja.
So should we sit or should I stand? Yeah, I'll stand first. Yeah. Hello, everybody. I'm Katja. This is my first time at DLD, so I might be a little bit clumsy, but just accept it. I'm from Estonia, which is like a small country in the Baltics. For those of you who don't know, I grew up there, and by sort of somehow my path got me to Amsterdam, Netherlands, where I've been working and studying for the last 6 years. And I was fortunate to meet an amazing group of peer friends in Amsterdam that inspired me to become an artist. And my first artist project ever basically was called Post-Internet Survival Guide 2010, and it was a book that I made as my graduation project in 2010. And it was basically a book. I was trying to capture the sort of the sensitivity of the time and of me being a 20-something human being living in the contemporary world. And my biggest inspiration was sort of this challenge of the internet and what it brings, this challenge of accelerating technology. And it's basically, I went to the subject straight ahead, and then I saw that there's a sort of an immense decrease in biodiversity, and there's immense challenges, but there's also this sort of human technological Frankenstein creature that is sort of infiltrating the world. And so in this book, I tried to cover this kind of moods with my own work and with the works of a lot of my peers that I included. So I sort of curated this work, and it includes works of 50 people, but it's sort of my editorial project. And it's about how, basically, about the interface between the human and the technological in the context of sort of ecology and geology of the Earth. And so the book basically, I think that the tip of the theme was that the book was kind of trying to access this idea that everything will be Google, everything, there will be sort of this digital, bio-digital alchemy that is happening, and what are the consequences for it as like spiritually, economically, and in terms of art. So it's a speculative project. I just ended up making a lot of speculation. And what it got me towards is this understanding of patterns as a sort of something that activates our perception, that patterns of technology, patterns of imagery, patterns of brands, that it's all about the sort of exchange of brands and objects and value that is happening in the world, and how it is somehow related to human evolution and the brain, and how we sort of get emotional over relationships and objects. And the kind of, when I was trying to speculate on the future of these developments, one of the things that I realized is that there's still a big competition between, not a competition, but in terms of intensity and in terms of value, in terms of aesthetic, in terms of complexity, biological life is still immensely more complex than a device, than an iPhone. So a cute frog is still infinitely more, it has infinite more complexity than an iPhone. So by imagining future technologies, I started to think about nature and this kind of, so I started to make sculptures which are basically renderings of animal forms, which are actually renderings of also technological potentialities. And this year I made a project which basically, going forward in my speculative practice, I started to think about Mars and how it's like the next frontier, also in terms of getting outside of the Earth and sort of tackling the new potentials for growth and things like this. And I made a project called Spirit, Curiosity, and Opportunity, which is all the names of the robots that are on Mars right now. And I was inspired particularly by all kinds of conspiracy theories about people identifying things on Mars from the pictures that the robots took. And then I made my own exhibition where, instead of the robot and instead of the sort of secret patterns and conspiracy theories, I invented my own Mars like landscape. And instead of a mechanical robot, it's this weird, bizarre bird. And I made it in a sort of a set as if it's like based on this myth of Stanley Kubrick making a moon landing video in Hollywood. I made like my own movie set for the Mars landing, basically, and then it was live streamed into the gallery space, where there was another bird, basically, as a kind of robot rendering. And now I'm making another book, which will be called Never Ending Story, and it's basically a book that is sort of tracing this birth of form and the materiality of biological life and materiality of technology, and how these two things are merging, and how the sort of patterns that we see today every day, where animals are mixed with technology and products, and kind of how it's sort of a circle of attention and circle of interfaces, and what it will bring to, basically. And this is my quick presentation of my work, and this is my website, and now we will have a sort of a quick discussion. Thank you.
Katja, thank you very, very much. Maybe to begin with the beginning, or to go back to the beginning, because you presented this wonderful book, The Post-Internet Survival Guide. It's kind of interesting to talk a little bit more about your background as a curator, because before, actually 4 years ago, starting your own art practice, you curated lots of different things, and I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about these different projects, because you did an exhibition in Amsterdam parallel to this book, actually with Anne de Vries and Ingve Holen. You then curated an exhibition actually at Bard, or were involved in an exhibition at Bard actually with Timothy Kin. And it's kind of interesting because many of these artists were also involved in our Ways Beyond the Internet panel here at DLD 18 months ago. So it would be great to hear a little bit how you connect and how you see this as a movement. Is it a movement? Is it a group?
Well, it's definitely started as this mutual inspiration peer group that we kind of knew each other in real life and the internet. And I was definitely introduced to it on the later stages, so I came new to it around 2008, 2009, and I just got inspired. And I didn't have courage yet to make my own work. I couldn't make my own work, so I started to organize what was already out there. And for me, this curatorial practice was like my own way of getting to know the people and getting to know the works, and sort of trying to figure out, meanwhile, what is my contribution, what do I have to say, and what do I have to say formally and artistically. But gradually I started to figure it out, so the projects became less and less curatorial and more artistic. But in the beginning, it was crucial for me to be in this position of more of a, not an outsider, but more sort of on this meta level, basically. But yeah, I sort of quickly jumped in, and then
and when we did the second panel on art and the internet, actually the 89 plus panel with Simon Caste at DLD, we kind of thought of this idea, or we observed this idea that for many of these artists, the internet is kind of a muse. And it seems that for you, a lot of the inspiration comes from YouTube, kind of nature, documentaries, but then also for your show at Bard, you used different Tumblr blogs. Can you tell us a little bit about this idea of the internet as a muse?
Well, it's basically, if you think about an artist, you still have this old school idea that you have to go to a shop, buy some paint, buy a canvas, and do things. And I did that when I was a child, but then as soon as I was sort of comfortable with the personal computer at the house, so that we had, and our slow internet connection, I started to use digital images and digital tools as my canvases, as my tools, and it came naturally. And then I just happened to discover that there's also the whole generation of artists growing up like that, so we had a mutual language to talk about, and there's all kinds of perspectives on it, and now even the artists that you mentioned, there's a huge variety in how people work, but the fact that we all sort of use imagery from online as a sort of content, as a sort of basically matter to be transformed. So yeah, it has a lot to do with appropriation and this idea of copyright, this kind of non-existent almost for me, in a sense. I take whatever I see and modify it.
And to give a concrete example, can you tell us a bit more about this piece at Bard, where you used hundreds of different Tumblr blogs and made them into an artwork?
Well, yeah, I mean, also the book, the Post-Internet Survival Guide, this is how it's made. The book is made from me scanning Tumblr blogs on and on, and having my own blog where I like everything. And it's like an archive. It is still a growing archive. I was not the person who invented this kind of practice. I stumbled upon it because there were a few people who've been doing it brilliantly, like this RUINS network of Kari Altman and Ian Ball and all these other people. And I got inspired, and again, I knew from the start that I'm going to make a book, so for me it was a tool to get stuff. And then I started to make sculptures, and for each sculpture I did the same thing. I just scan immense amount of imagery, and then I make collages and assemblages, and then I make them physical. And for the show in Bard, I had this particular strange combination of having images of birds and then images of attractive gay men, and I put it together, and then it became sort of a source for sculptures. But yeah, it's very visual work, but instead of me going around with the camera, I just go to Tumblr, to Google image search, and like find my way around and then use it to make work. And then hopefully creating something that hasn't been there before.
Now you also make the work very physical. You take these photographs and images you find on the internet and make them very physical. And in a way, when we discussed earlier at breakfast this morning, this relationship between the digital and the physical, you don't really see it as a split distinction, but you sort of call it gradient. Can you tell us a little bit about how this works? Well,
I think it's becoming clearer and clearer that there's no black and white distinction between it's not this sort of old media theory. You don't have to differentiate between media. Similar stuff can exist within different media, as an image, as a sculpture, as an image of a sculpture, as a tweet about the sculpture, as an Instagram image of that sculpture. But there's still a sculpture, and it's just like sort of a fuzziness of imagery and mediation. And in that sense, it is. and it is all sort of equally, it's not just equally important, it's just equally potent to be interesting. So what I do is just I use most of social networks available and that I'm not lazy to use, just to experiment just with what it can do to being an artist.
Now there is 2 exhibitions where you bring kind of all of these elements together. They both happened in Berlin. One was in 2012 and the other one very recently, which I saw. Maybe it's good to tell us a little bit more about these 2 exhibitions, because it's in 2012 with the macro expansion, this sort of idea of a cosmic expansion, that you launch your approximation series where you appropriate familiar images actually of animals and make them into these large prints, and that obviously has to do with extinction. So maybe you can tell us about that first show in 2012.
Yeah, it was basically like sort of positioning my idea of that if you want to look at technology, and especially if you want to speculate on what will happen, you have to see the macro narrative of evolutionary, like sort of becoming from how the universe was built, basically up to the point of how JPEGs are being transmitted, and there's a sort of, you can find some little patterns in narrative and how that developed. So so again, I just decided, okay, I'm going to take these beautiful images of a penguin couple and sort of present them in this empty space and just show that these penguins have been existing for millions of years, and they've been making these beautiful arches, whether there was human to look at them or not, and that there's a sort of certain aesthetics that is built in the network of life, and I think it is continuing in the network of what humans are doing. So there's a sort of, I'm always just basically, it's not just about like digital technology and non-digital, it's also about biology and things that were considered cultural and how there's sort of relationships between these. And so this first show, Macro Expansion, was sort of exploring that idea. And also it's not just about aesthetics, it's also about this emotion of bonding and this sort of the aesthetics of emotions, basically, that is in there. And of course, this idea that technological beings, like cars, are in a way pushing the actual biological ones further into sort of the gutters and extinction, and how we have to be aware of that, and whether to accept it or not to accept it, and on which conditions and things like this.
Now the more recent show is called Spirit, Curiosity and Opportunity, and you all saw the images before. It's this Mars landscape. There was a marabou bird, there was a Martian landscape, there was a screen monitor. The exhibition happened on these 2 floors, one can say, and in a very interesting way, one started actually to question what is real and what is not real. All of a sudden, one was wondering actually if actually the NASA recordings of Mars would be real. And one of the things which was very striking was that throughout this exhibition, there were these arrows. The arrows were almost like a MacGuffin, or they were kind of a personified abstraction. They kept popping up in a very kind of physical way. So I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about how this exhibition works and how you use this arrow materiality, which brings us back actually to something very archaic, something very ancient.
Yeah, basically, there's this narrative of exponential technology and economical growth, and I'm always attracted to the images, the growth arrows that are kind of popping up in every business presentation. And if you just Google growth arrow, there's like a massive population of different colors of different kinds of growth arrows, and they're all very wavy and sort of there's peaks and falls, and it's all very dramatic. And I started to think first that they look actually like snakes, and they have this animistic quality, and I think that's why they work as images as well. They have something ancient in them, and I sort of decided to materialize them again, to make them physical and very present. And this idea also of how do you render this exponential growth. And sort of if you take the arrow that's just basically an abstract object, and sort of if you point to its origins, to snakes and shooting arrows from ancient as an ancient technology, then it all comes together in a way. And and then I just want to see what happens. What happens if I just make a bunch of arrows and put them around, and then totally misuse the symbol, in a way.
Now we're running out of time. I've got actually 2 last questions very quickly. maybe interesting for everyone here is your connection to Manuel de Landa, because I think he's an author who is a great toolbox for the 21st century. And for many of the topics discussed earlier this morning, I was thinking about Manuel de Landa and his whole idea of nonlinearity. You met de Landa. He's for you very much a sort of a philosophical toolbox. Can you tell us a little bit what connects you to him and why it's so urgent that we all read Manuel de Landa?
Yeah, so we kind of got close to him together with Timur when we were working on this exhibition in Bard in 2012. But it's basically he is able to explain this sort of evolutionary narrative of how matter developed on Earth in a very sort of clear way, and it's not just sort of speculative philosophy. He's really interested in how the physical world works and what it means, how you see technology, how you see economical growth, and how you see art. And for me, it's the best toolbox in a way to access what I'm trying to do, which is basically acknowledge this over-materiality of us, ourselves, our species, and our technology that we're building, but also kind of see some sort of patterns in that, and sort of analyze ourselves, and also see what is archaic, and maybe we need to modify that, and what is actually beautiful and can be continued, I guess. So he's definitely worth checking out. I recommend to everybody. Yeah.
Great. Very last question. We had a lot of, we saw a lot of presentations this morning which addressed the future, and Steffi was talking a lot, preparing this DLD about how the world will be in the future, and I was kind of wondering, thinking about the future, how art will be in the future. We heard a presentation about the city, I think, in 2023. Can you tell us about some of your still unrealized future exhibitions? Do you have dreams or unrealized projects, or projects which haven't been possible yet to be realized because of technology? Or
well, I'm now trying to plan this idea that I am actually going to take sculptures to deserts and rainforests, and ultimately I would love to have a sculpture on Mars with a live feed going on Earth to a gallery, and then I just sell that sculpture from Mars together with the patch of Mars land, maybe. But there are these kind of things. But I like this. Basically, I want to work more with this idea of having art somewhere completely secret underwater in the bottom of the ocean, and using technology to stream it and to sort of still create a relationship between humans somewhere in Munich and a thing that is somewhere in the bottom of the ocean with some fish swimming around. So these are the things that they're ambitious. So let's see if that works out.
That could not be a more wonderful conclusion. We hope that you all can come to London on the 18th, 19th of October to the Serpentine Galleries, where we will have the Extinction Marathon, inspired by the legendary Gustav Metzger, where we will have artists, scientists, architects, people from all different disciplines, and of course, including Katja, talking about, making presentations about the topic of extinction. Katja, thank you very, very much.
Thank you
all. Thank you.
Thank you.